La is a punch to the face. Ma is like a Vulcan death grip. It makes your entire mouth shut down almost. It makes your mouth less sensitive and you can handle more pain. Kind of like the lube. There's people that sell lube that make your all cold so you can for longer. Yeah, same concept. What up, guys? Oh, sorry. 下午好. Last time we did one of these, our numbers were actually really good because we made fly less. Walk, hey. And it was very angry and slightly racially charged and bigoted. And I feel like that's why it did well, which kind of grossed me out. So today we're gonna see if we can make a little bit more civilized content. And we're gonna make one of my low-key favorites, 担担面, which is a street-side, lukewarm to hot noodle dish served in the humid basin of the middle of our country where spicy stuff comes from. If you're overseas, it might be lumped together with Sichuan or Sichuan, but that's not really the case. And we'll talk about it later. So first thing we do is we put some Sichuan peppercorns, or huajiao. We wouldn't call them Sichuan huajiao here because that makes no sense. It's kind of like when in English people say chai tea, but chai means tea. So this goes into a wok on low-medium heat. We're actually building the sauce right now. The stuff that goes in the bottom of the bowl plate for you to put your noodles on and then garnish with your toppings. Feel free to make this sauce in a normal small pan, which is smarter. I'm just doing this to stay on brand because we have a theme here, which is authentic, inauthentic Chinese food. But if you're a reasonable person, use a pan or a pot. In my opinion, this is the food in China that most closely resembles in form factor, history, and flavor theory to Mexican food. It's very heavily flavored, but not ridiculous. To outsiders, it looks bombastic, but realistically, it's quite nuanced and intelligent. It's heavy on flavors out of necessity, which then later changed as history progressed. I almost just burnt these. So, once you smell the fragrance, into a grinder they go. And you shut the heat off, and in the pan goes some soy sauce. Wok hei. Yes, some caramelized wok hei. Some black vinegar, a little bit of salt. I know it's now part of every chef's personality to say, I don't give a about MSG. MSG isn't unhealthy. Don't let those lobbyists tell you different. MSG is perfectly fine, and it is. I just don't think it needs to go in everything, right? So a little bit of sugar. I'm almost always using powdered sugar these days because I can't wait for things to dissolve. And then you're good to go. Just kind of let it hang out and let everything dissolve and get happy. And that's your base. So the ratios is roughly 4 to 1 to half of soy sauce to vinegar to sugar. That is not a recipe. That is just where I like to start. So it's very negotiable based entirely on how you like to eat. So in Chinese, generally speaking, when we make a dish, we have this thing called 味型, which is the form factor of flavor. And it is usually a 2-word adjective descriptor of what the dish will taste like. So whether it's 咸口的,甜口的,酸口的. This is supposed to be 咸酸. The first word is usually the main driving force, and the second word is usually the follow-up, right? A little bit of it to round it out. Here's a really fun detail. I don't know if you've noticed. Here in China, we say 酸甜口. In English, they say sweet and sour pork. 然后通过一系列的巧合, when we put that food in our mouth, 哇,太甜了. Because sweet came before sour. 就你下意识就做了一个甜酸口的东西了. Yeah, see? This is what we call here in China bullshit. I have no idea what I'm talking about. Another reason that I like to use powdered sugar is it gives it a little bit of body because there's a lot of cornstarch in powdered sugar. And that is essentially the qie, or the thickener of this kind of flavor base. And you want roughly twice as much sesame paste as you do. Don't be afraid, because once you put your seasoning in, there's a chance that your sesame paste will seize up, which is fine, because it's just the water upsetting the fats in here. It essentially upsets the emulsion and seizes it up, kind of like when you add water to chocolate. Just add a bit of water to loosen it up. Now this is where I've lost all the traditionalists, because this is not what you're supposed to do. The traditional version only put a little bit, but I like the nuttiness, so I always make a kind of thicker paste. So this is fine. Now here is my Szechuan peppercorn. First of all, this area is essentially a basin surrounded, ringed by mountains, and it makes the middle hot and humid and almost unbearable to live in the summer. What that means for food is, historically, the food from this region is very heavily seasoned for preservation purposes and almost always ferment adjacent. So they do a lot of fermenting, keep shit from spoiling. Now, when chili showed up after the Columbian exchange, it melded really well into this lifestyle of cooking because chilies ferment beautifully and it accentuates the food that was already there, the heavily flavored, cuts through the grease, cuts through the fat, cuts through the salt. And also, it adds a little bit of dimension to the original spicy of Sichuan, which is ma, not la. In we go. Another thing about their food is they separate their flavor categories very cleanly. If I'm not mistaken, there's 24 味型 in 川菜，什么鱼香、怪味，怪味是其中之一。Literally, there's a form factor of flavor called 怪味, which means strangeness. To outsiders, it looks like a mess. It's like looking at one of Rachmaninoff's charts. It makes no sense that this could be music. But to people who are, you know, pianists, they go, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's difficult, and it's a lot, but it makes sense. Also, another great thing about people from this region is they're the most chill. I don't know if it has to do with the weather, but they're the chillest. Like, they're the most, yeah, whatever, sure. Like, they're most hang-outable people in the country. They don't take themselves that seriously. I appreciate their sense of humor. I appreciate the way they live their lives. I wish I could be more similar. I just don't have it in me. All right, so that's our sauce. It hangs out there, and we're on to our topping, which is the pork. Now, in this pork goes a little bit of soy sauce, sesame oil, a little bit of salt, a little bit of MSG, cornstarch, and a little bit of sugar. Oh, by the way, if you see all these ingredients, don't freak out. I know it's really, really annoying when some in an apron on the internet says, simply gather your 35 million ingredients and put them together in a way that looks like you already knew how to do it. These boxes are things you should already have, besides maybe MSG, depending on where you're from. Powdered sugar, but use normal sugar. Cornstarch, but use any starch. Black vinegar, use a vinegar of your choice. Sesame paste, you can use tahini if you want. It'll just be less nutty. And salt. Like, if you don't have that, why are you watching this video? After having said all this, he whips out the thing that's most hard to get. So this is called yacai. Depending on where you're from, it has different names, the vegetable itself, but really it's just pickled mustard greens. 芥菜, 鹹芥菜, fermented. Very big part of basin food in China. If you can't get this, use sauerkraut. Any salt-heavy, acid-light, fermented vegetable, leafy vegetable of your choice. That could be anything. Now, there's a lot of oil in the bottom. I've added some bottom grease after lubing my wok or huaguo. Now, if you want your final dish to be a little bit spicier, at this point you can put any dried chili of choice into this oil and toast it, and then ditch the chili. But if I'm perfectly honest with you, it doesn't matter that much. What I've just done is get my oil rip-roaring hot and then throw in pretty much an equal portion of this pickled vegetable, which once again, like I said, can be sauerkraut. And as it hits the fat, it's gonna go really nutty and savory, almost grainy in a way. It's gonna taste like toasted grains. Once again, if you have a flat burner at home, this is proof positive. This is proof positive that a round wok and a flat burner work. All right, now once you get a little bit of fragrance, because this is dark, you're not gonna see a lot of color. If you're using sauerkraut, you will see color. Now is the time for you to put in your seasoned pork. And you want to start bashing it up the moment it hits the pan. At this stage, if you're used to making Western food at home, this would be similar in action to when you're making a ragu, the slightly more traditional way, which is instead of coloring heavily, you sweat your veg first and then put in your proteins later and cook them with the veg base. Now, what's really intelligent about putting cornstarch and sugar inside this pork mince is that you can achieve a little bit of color and a little bit of crispity texture at a temperature that won't burn your pickled mustard greens. If you just use raw pork, by the time your pork colors, your greens are f***ed. A little bit of cooking wine. You could have added that at any point. The alcohol is just there to provide a little bit of counterbalance sting to the pork, because some pork might be a little funky. Of all the Tainan noodles that I've had, this pork topping can be quite soft and piecey, or it can be a little chunky and dry. I like mine to be saucy and piecey because it reminds me more of a ragu or a jjiajiangmian. What is better for my palate, because I'm a northern boy. Now, this is my little tray of topping. Let it cool down a bit. Scrub my wok out. So for those of you who like cooking with non-stick or any coating sensitive or scrub sensitive pans, cast iron, carbon steel at home, I highly recommend you get a Bamboo Scrubby. They're very coating friendly. So you can bang at your non-stick pan with it, scratch your carbon steel pan with it, clean your cast iron pan with it. They're cheap. Here they're like, what, 15 kwai for a good one? Give it a shot. 古人的智慧. The next thing is chili oil. Buy is what I recommend. Make some other time. But this is just an assortment of chilies with oil sprayed over it while it's rip-roaring hot, and it's a pretty essential part of the building of this dish. If you don't want to put it on, don't put it on. If you want to make your own because you have a lot of time and you're not busy, yeah, feel free to do that too. All right, so we have our sesame sauce, we have our pork topping, we have our chili oil. It's time to assemble.
所以为什么叫大大呢？没有做过。
No idea. 因为我这故事听过好几个人跟我说好几遍了，我没有一次是说明白的。But I'm sure someone down below knows better than me, and they're willing to pipe in with their long paragraph of where the name came from. And I'm excited to learn. I just have never heard the same story twice. If you're gonna comment, like, subscribe, comment with something that we can all learn from, whether it be angry or not. Why is it called 担担面?
煮这个面不用等水滚。
With most noodle cooking, I don't bother. As long as the water is hot to like 70, 80 degrees, or I have a big enough burner, it doesn't really matter. It's good practice to let your water boil first, because then the turbulence of the boil will help your noodles to fall apart and not stick to each other. But if you're perfectly happy to stir your noodles, then you're fine. If you really think about it, like in Italian cooking and Mediterranean cooking, it goes like, oh, bring a large pot of water to the boil, salt it till it tastes like seawater, and then put in a small amount of pasta. It's a waste of energy, waste of time, in my opinion. In Asian cooking, we don't use nearly as much water, but we're always here going, right? All right, cool. So here I have a bowl of icy cold water. This is a step that most Western cooks would disagree with. After starting to make Western food, I also stopped doing this as often. But with 担担面, almost always you cook your noodles and then you throw it into ice cold water. Oh, ow. I took that like a porn star. I didn't even move. And then you throw it into cold water to shock it down, and it gives it a little bit more bounciness, which is not true. It just stops it from cooking. When you put noodles into cold water, it doesn't make them bouncier, it just stops them overcooking. Now, there's two ways of doing this. You can either noodle in sauce around / on top, which I've seen before, and then a little bit of topping. And remember, go light, because this is very, very heavily seasoned. And then you go in with a delicious chili oil. Finish with some green onions. Cilantro if you feel like it. Another way of doing this is sauce on the bottom if you want a slightly prettier presentation. So yeah, these noodles are served roughly lukewarm. They're not served piping hot. And then, yes, back to my chili oil. A little bit of green onion on top. So it's not a pretty dish. Actually, no, it's kind of beautiful. I mean, depends on what you like. I think it's kind of cute. But it is very simple. And if I'm perfectly honest, I much prefer something like this over like cacio e pepe or carbonara. With carbonara, there's so much cultural baggage of, oh, I have to use pecorino romano, not parmigiano. I have to make sure it's guanciale and not pancetta. And I have to cook it to this amount of crispy. And add the pasta water, and it has to be this quality of spaghetti. No, too much. Too much emotional baggage for what is heavily seasoned sauce plus nudes. Yeah. Remember, in food from the basin, the chili oil is not there to accentuate the spicy. It's there to round it out. This looks deadly and unfriendly, but it's actually really gentle. So Hunan food is a whole other kind of spicy. That's just unfriendly sometimes. Hunan food will make your butthole look like the Japanese flag if you eat too much of it, right? It's fucking nasty. All right, cool. Thank you so much for watching. It's been a lot of fun. Once again, I apologize for being so contentious to a lot of the more sensitive of you last time around. I hope this time was more sensitive of you last time around. I hope this time was more civilized and informative. Comment, like, subscribe, and let me know what you would like to see next time. Preferably nothing about wok hei. See you guys later.